Houses are not empty. Not truly. They hold the breaths of those who lived inside them, the echoes of their footsteps, the residue of their fears. Some houses even hold presences. Ones that do not leave when the last owner does. This is the story of Edward Marquez, a man who believed ghosts were just metaphors, until he set foot inside his grandfather's final home. A house that had been waiting and watching. The rain was thin and constant, like the sky was quietly mourning. Edward's car rolled up to the property with a low growl, the sound swallowed by the damp air. Weeds brushed against his legs as he approached the porch. The house stood like a forgotten monument, tall, pale, wounded by time. A single broken shutter knocked against the wall with every weak breath of wind. The front door resisted him, swollen by humidity. When it finally opened, a stale odor hit him, dust, mildew, and something else. Something old. The first room was dim. The curtains hung like heavy eyelids. Edward turned the light switch. Nothing. As he walked deeper inside, he felt a slight tremor on the floorboards. Not because of his weight, but because something upstairs moved a moment before. He froze. A long shadow stretched down the stairs. It did not flicker with any light source. It simply existed. Solid. Still. When he blinked, the shadow retracted as if inhaled by the darkness. He stood alone in silence, confused, uneasy, but forcing himself to stay rational. He whispered, "Maybe I'm just tired." But something deep inside him said he wasn't. The first night was restless. Around 1:30 a.m., the house began to settle, groaning like an old man waking from a bad dream. Edward tried to ignore it, until he heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming from the second floor. He sat up instantly, heart pounding. Another step. Then another. Then a long dragging scrape. SHHHHKKK. As if someone dragged their foot, or something heavier. Edward climbed out of bed and grabbed his phone for light. "Raccoons," he whispered. "Or a loose shutter." But raccoons didn't walk in slow circles across creaking floorboards. And shutters didn't drag themselves. He climbed the stairs. Each step felt like walking into ice. At the top, his flashlight swept over the empty hallway. 3 doors. All closed. Nothing else. But at the far end, in the corner, a shape darker than the night. A shadow standing upright, long and impossibly thin. Before he could scream, the house shuddered. And every door in the hallway slammed shut simultaneously. Boom. 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 The shadow vanished. Edward ran back downstairs, nearly stumbling. That night, he barely slept. He found the box on the 4th day. Hidden behind sacks of rice in the pantry. Locked with a brass latch. On the top, scratched by a shaky hand. "For when I'm gone." Inside, he found old sepia photographs. A silver key. Newspaper clippings. And a letter. His grandfather's handwriting trembled with age. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and the house will no longer hide what it holds. Before this place was a home, it was a sanatorium. People came here to die in peace. But one man did not die quietly. And he did not leave. Some say the fire consumed him so fast that even his shadow burned into the walls. That it became part of the house." Edward shivered. He looked at the photographs. One picture showed his grandfather, young and smiling, standing at the foot of the stairs. Behind him, the mirror reflected something pitch black. A figure. Standing so close its head nearly touched his. The same shape Edward had seen upstairs. His blood ran cold. That night the house felt alive. The walls pulsed. The lights flickered. Air pressed against his skin like the house was breathing. Edward lay in bed, trying to convince himself it was just nerves. Then, tap, 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 at his bedroom door. Too soft to be knocking. Too rhythmic to be random. He held his breath. The tapping became a dragging sound. S-H-H-H-H-H-H. Across the wood. Then a whisper seeped through the crack beneath the door. Edward. His name. Drawn out. Broken. As if spoken by someone with no lungs. "Who's there?" he whispered. A long silence. Then, "Why did you come back?" The doorknob twisted violently. He bolted upright, screaming. "Stop!" Everything froze. Then, slowly, the knob turned back into place. Edward didn't sleep again that night. The next afternoon, he drove into town, seeking answers. At the old diner, an elderly waitress looked at him with wide eyes. "You're the Marquez boy," she said softly. "You shouldn't be in that house." Edward leaned in. "What do you know about it?" She swallowed hard. "We all know. Everybody here does. That house, that land. It was a sanatorium the church shut down. A fire took nearly all the patients." "Nearly?" Edward asked. "One wasn't in his room when they found him. He'd crawled into the hall, leaning against the wall." She lowered her voice. "They couldn't move him." "Why not?" She shivered. "His shadow wouldn't detach." Edward's throat tightened. He asked the waitress if anyone else ever saw something in the house. Her eyes darkened. "Many tenants came. None stayed more than a week." "What happened to them?" "They left," she whispered. "But some didn't leave alone." Edward's skin crawled. When Edward came back home, the house felt colder. Hostile. He turned the key in the door. Before it even opened, he heard footsteps running upstairs. Fast. Heavy. Thump, 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 thump. He froze. Then silence. Absolute silence. He walked inside cautiously. The staircase loomed in the dark hall. For the first time, he noticed something carved into the wooden banister, shallow but deliberate. He watches. He stepped back. The house groaned deeply, as if reacting to him. Later that night, as he tried to sleep, he heard breathing. Not from beside him. Not from the hall. From above him. As if someone were lying flat on the ceiling, mouth open, inhaling slowly. He held his breath. The breathing paused. Then, scratch. 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 From directly above his head. Edward leaped out of bed, heart racing, and ran to the living room. He stayed awake until dawn, every light on. He didn't know the house had a basement. He discovered it accidentally when he heard humming near the kitchen floor. A faint, childlike tune. He followed the sound until he found a door he had never noticed. Thin, wooden, painted over, with scratch marks around the edges. Something was humming on the other side. He reached for the knob. The humming stopped instantly. He froze. Then something tapped once. Slow and deliberate. On the other side of the door. He backed away. The knob began twisting on its own. Slowly. Steadily. Like a hand inside was turning it. The door creaked open. Darkness. Deep, suffocating darkness. Edward slammed it shut. He shoved a chair against it. From the other side came a soft voice. "Don't lock me in." For days, Edward avoided the upstairs hall, but the house wouldn't let him rest. Lights flickered, always in a path leading to the stairs. Doors opened on their own. Cold air seeped from the upper floor even when vents were closed. He felt watched constantly. Finally, he couldn't take it. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed. At the top, the hallway was colder than a freezer. All 3 doors were open. A foul smell dripped out. Rot, mold, and something metallic. He stepped into the first room. Black marks streaked the walls. Thin, long finger-like smudges dragged downward. He whispered, "Grandpa, What happened here? As if in response, the door slammed shut. He spun around, but the shadow stood in the opposite corner. Still. Silent. Closer than ever. Edward backed away. The shadow lifted an arm. A gesture almost human. Then pointed to the mirror at the far wall. Heart pounding, he stepped toward it. The mirror was covered in dust. Except for one place. A single word was wiped clean. Stay. He stumbled back, shaking. But when he looked at the shadow again, it was gone. The second room was worse. Inside stood a tall mirror framed in black wood. The same mirror he had seen in the photo with his grandfather. Something about it radiated dread. A white sheet draped over it moved slightly. Even though there was no wind. Edward approached. With a trembling hand, he lifted the sheet. The mirror shimmered. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, it changed. His reflection flickered, then split. Behind him, another figure appeared. The shadow. But now it had a head. Arms. Hands. Human shape. But consuming all light. Its hand rose slightly. And in real life, Edward felt cold fingers grip his shoulder. He screamed and spun around. But no one was there. When he turned back to the mirror, he saw his grandfather. Standing beside the shadow. Mouth open. Eyes wide. Frozen in terror. And the shadow slowly turned toward Edward. The mirror cracked. Then shattered. After the mirror broke, the house changed. He began seeing flashes. Pale shapes in the hall. Smoke. Burned bodies leaning against the walls. Not ghosts. Memories. Imprints. Trauma soaked into the foundation. One night he saw a burned man crawl across the ceiling. Another night he saw a woman whispering with no jaw. Sometimes he heard sobbing. Sometimes laughter. And sometimes, worst of all, the house whispered his name from every wall at once. He realized the house was not haunted by one spirit. It was haunted by many. But the shadow? It was something else. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Something older. Something hungry. It happened at 3:11 a.m. Like always. The entire house shook. Lights died. Air froze. Edward woke gasping. Unable to move. Something sat on the edge of his bed. Slowly, his eyes adjusted. A tall, dark silhouette leaned over him. Slow breaths poured out of it, cold enough to sting. It whispered. I waited. For someone who could hear me. Edward trembled violently. What do you want? The shadow leaned closer. A body. It hissed. A voice. A place in the world again. Edward tried to scream. But a cold hand covered his mouth. The shadow whispered. Let me in. The room spun. Shadows melted across the walls. His vision blurred. Then everything went black. When Edward woke up, he wasn't in his bed. He was standing in the hallway upstairs. Barefoot. Shivering. Holding something. A charred bone. He dropped it immediately. His head pulsed with whispers. I'm hungry. Open the basement. Let me out. Edward ran downstairs. But every window in the house was boarded shut. Not by him. By someone else. By something else. He grabbed his keys. The door wouldn't unlock. Something on the other side whispered. Don't leave me. He backed away, horrified. The humming from the basement returned. This time, louder. Directly under his feet. He knew he had to confront it. He moved the chair blocking the door and grabbed a lantern. The basement door creaked open as if expecting him. Cold air burst upward. He descended slowly. Each stair groaned under him. At the bottom, he found the remains of the sanatorium. Half-burned beds, metal restraints, charred wheelchairs piled in a corner. The basement was massive, far bigger than the house above. And in the far back, he saw a man sitting against the wall, completely still. Edward approached. "Sir, are you alive?" The figure did not move. Edward reached out and touched his shoulder. The figure crumbled into ashes. Behind him, something inhaled deeply. A long, slow, hungry breath. The shadow rose from the ashes. Huge. Solid. Awake. Edward ran. Through the basement. Up the stairs. Through the hall. Every light exploded as he passed. The shadow followed. Not walking, not floating. Sliding. Across the floor and walls like spilled ink, chasing him. It whispered, "Don't run. You're mine." He reached the front door, slammed into it, and twisted the lock. It broke off in his hand. He sprinted into the kitchen. Fumbled with the back door. It wouldn't budge. Behind him, the shadow began taking shape. A burned man. Blackened face. Eyes like empty pits. It raised a hand. Edward fell to the floor, choking, as invisible fingers wrapped around his throat. The shadow whispered, "Your body is warm. I want it." Edward clawed at the floor, and his fingers brushed the box he had found weeks earlier. Inside was the silver key. He grabbed it. The shadow shrieked. A sound like metal tearing bone. The key fit only one place. The locked door on the second floor. He ran up, gasping, stumbling, with the shadow crawling up the stairs behind him. He unlocked the door. It burst open with a gust of freezing wind. Inside was a small room with burned walls. On one wall, etched deeply, "Don't let him out." On the floor, a seal, drawn in ash and old blood. The shadow recoiled, hissing violently. Edward didn't understand the symbols, but he stepped inside anyway. The shadow followed. As soon as it entered the circle on the floor, the room exploded with light. The shadow screamed. 1,000 voices crying at once. The house shook violently. Smoke poured from the walls. Edward collapsed. When Edward opened his eyes, the house was silent. Still. Empty. The shadow was gone. He stumbled outside, exhausted, half-conscious. He never returned. The house was sold. Then abandoned. Then fenced off. But sometimes, neighbors swear they see a tall figure in the upstairs window. A shadow that doesn't move. A shadow that watches. A shadow waiting for someone to open the door again.